You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on January 22nd. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 236. Welcome to the 236th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. Today, I'm sharing another installment of my Fertility Awareness Reality series. So we have an on-air client session with my client, Leah, who was a member of my most recent 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And there are still spaces available in the January 2019 Fertility Awareness Mastery 10-week group program. I'm really excited to be jumping into 2019 and just starting with a bang. Fertility Awareness Mastery is a unique program that gives you an opportunity to learn fertility awareness alongside a group of like-minded women who are doing the exact same thing. And it really fast forwards your learning process because not only do you get to see what's happening in your own chart and benefit from in-depth instruction about fertility awareness, you also have the opportunity to see what other women's charts look like. And what's really interesting about fertility awareness is that when you're charting your cycles, you're typically only seeing your own charts. And so you really only see your own experience. And even if you're part of online groups and women are posting their charts, there's often not a lot of context. So you're not necessarily getting a detailed breakdown going through the charts with someone who has experience actually interpreting and providing more of context and information around what you're actually seeing. And so for the women who jump in and join Fertility Awareness Mastery, that's often one of their favorite aspects of the program and why they opt for the group program in the first place, to have a shared experience with other women, to have a place where they can ask all of their questions, where nothing is TMI, and also to benefit from just seeing a bit of variety in terms of what can actually show up on the menstrual cycle chart. And so if you're ready to jump in and learn fertility awareness, if you've been charting already and you're feeling okay, but not necessarily as confident in using the method as your primary birth control, or if you have been seeing some things on your charts and you're not really sure what they all mean, then I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and make sure to join us. We'll be starting in just a few weeks as this episode is airing. This is the final episode of 2018. So we're closing out with a bang with an on-air client session. So with that said, let's jump into today's session with Leah. And I'm really excited to be here with Leah this evening. And Leah is a member of my current 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And we're actually a little over half done, actually. As we're recording this, we still have a few sessions left, but we're definitely more than halfway in. So Leah and I, we have, well, it's not really we because you're the one filling out the chart, but you have about a chart and a half. So we've, been together for a couple of weeks now. So thank you for coming on the show, Leah.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, and I just wanted to start with, I suppose I always like to start by just having you share a little bit about your history and what brought you to fertility awareness. So perhaps you could share with us, when you started menstruating, if you've used hormonal birth control or whatever type of birth control before, and kind of what led you to shift the focus into fertility awareness charting.
Okay, great. So I started menstruating in 6th grade, which I think, you're like 11, 12, around that age, around that time. So I guess not extremely early by some standards, but a little bit early. And then I actually had an interesting start into birth control world. I never got on birth control because I needed it as birth control. And I didn't get on it for acne or other similar reasons why a lot of women get on it. So when I was a senior in high school, I had pretty bad acne throughout my teenage years and got on Accutane, which uses high doses of vitamin A to basically stop your glands from producing sebum, or I think that's how you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And that caused me to get like very dry. And meanwhile, while this was happening, I was training for soccer because I was going to be playing a year of soccer in college. So I was running a lot and working out a lot. And so I also played soccer in high school. And in high school, whenever I ran, I had this really strange problem where I would start cramping like menstrual cramps, but they were so much worse than any menstrual cramps I'd ever had before. Like during my periods, my cramps were super, like really light, manageable. I sometimes took ibuprofen, but not even consistently. But only when I ran, I would get terrible menstrual cramps and like feel like I was going to like vomit and have diarrhea all at the same time. And like, it was weird because it would start and it wouldn't stop until it like ran its course. Like even if I stopped and walked, it wouldn't go away. So it was just a really weird thing. And my mom took me we went to the gyno and they did like an ultrasound, and they also looked internally with the speculum, and they didn't see anything abnormal. And I looked online at like forums to see if women had similar issues, and I found that some women did have similar issues, and no one really had concrete answers as to what it was. And it's also important to say that I've always been like an athlete, so I knew the difference between cramps, like a stitch in your side, and what this pain was. And sometimes I would bleed when I was having this really intense pain. So that was happening through like freshman, sophomore, junior year of high school. Senior year, I got on Accutane. It affected my hormones. I didn't really understand how, but I just knew it was affecting my hormones. And I was running, and I realized that I didn't have those problems. I was able to run, like I was running 6 miles a day and didn't have any issues. And then over that summer, it's Accutane you only take for like 6 to 8 months and then you're done. So I had gone through like a certain amount of time and was done with the medication. A couple months later, it wore off completely, and I started having that issue again where I was running for soccer to get ready for the season. And the weeks before, I'd been running 6 miles, and then I couldn't even run 1 mile. And that pain would start, and I would be like crippled, fetal position on the road, like what is happening? And so I didn't know what exactly had changed, but I knew it was somehow hormone related. And so I asked my mom if she would put me on birth control, because I was like 2 weeks away from going to college and having to be able to run for more than a mile. And when she put me on birth control, I was able to start running again. So I still don't know what it is, but that was kind of the start into my birth control. And I was on oral contraceptives. Mononessa was what I used for 4 years. And during that time, there was probably like a year afterwards, I came off of it for about a month or so, and wanted to, just because I wasn't seeing anyone and I had stopped playing soccer. So I felt like I didn't need it anymore. And I just ran for fun then. And when I came off of it, that issue, like I remember one time being on a trail and just running a little bit and just having to I just curled up in the fetal position on the trail and just waited for it to pass. And so then I got back on it after that because I wanted to be able to run just for pleasure. And so I was on it for 2 more years, got off of it eventually and got on the copper IUD and was on that for a year. And during that transition time, there was a couple times where I would have that pain, but it wasn't nearly as intense as when I was younger. And now, and also during that time, I've been throughout my college years, I've been transitioning my diet to more vegetables, more meat, less processed foods, all like emphasizing good quality. And now I can run and I don't have any problems. So I find it really interesting because I never figured out exactly what it was, but it seemed to have pretty much resolved itself. Yeah. So then I got off, I was on the copper IUD and just didn't like the idea of, I just didn't completely understand what that was doing to my body, but I knew it works through inflammation, and chronic inflammation is not necessarily a good thing. So I decided to get that removed. And my friend had told me about FAM. She actually got pregnant on the copper IUD. And I know like 3 or 4 people who have gotten pregnant on the copper IUD, which is crazy because they say it's like 99.97% effective. And yet I know like 3 or 4 people who all got pregnant. So she got pregnant and didn't want to get the copper IUD again. And she looked into FAM and found Taking Charge of Your Fertility and told me about it. And it took me about a year to like really warm up to the idea. But as soon as I started reading myself, I was pretty convinced and it seemed like scientific. So I got hooked at that point. And now I've been practicing for, I guess, 8 months, but 6 months were just on my own with Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and then 2 months with the group.
Wow. Well, you've had quite a journey, Leah. Thank you for taking us through that.
Yeah.
It's so, I wonder how many women have experienced something similar. That's really intense, especially when you're a young woman and you're in high school. It's really hard to manage pain and those types of things, especially when it happens regularly.
Yeah.
And especially when you're active and it's interfering with you just want to be a teenager, right? And you just want to be able to kind of do your sports and do the things that you want to do.
Right. And just wondering if why, if my pain was normal or not.
No.
Not knowing if it was, at the time, just like not knowing, like, why is everyone else able to run and I'm over here struggling? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, definitely not normal. I mean, the question that comes to mind, and I'm sure it's come to your mind over the years, especially as you've kind of just, searched for answers and tried to figure it out, is, could it possibly be related to something like endometriosis, given that it was happening outside of your period and it was so intense, and it's not something they can find necessarily on an ultrasound. It's not a reliable way to find it. And the only way that I know of currently for them to get a diagnosis is to do laparoscopic surgery, which I'm sure that they're not really too interested in doing on a teenager.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the one thing that I've thought that it might have been was endometriosis. Because when I was looking into it just for fun for a friend who has endometriosis, I saw that it's sometimes running can cause the pain, can cause significant pain, which I thought was interesting, and was just like, I wonder if that was what was happening to me.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, it's interesting that medicine would kind of look at this as a mystery and kind of like shrug their shoulders and like, we don't really know how to help you, take some pain meds, when, endometriosis is a fairly significant problem. There's research on it, and a lot of women suffer from it. And so it's interesting, right, that you tell me, at any point, did any of your, healthcare providers even say like, this could be related to that?
I don't remember them saying that. I think if they did, then we probably would have tried to look into it more. But I think the general, they stopped looking once we did the ultrasound and once they checked internally and like felt for ovarian cysts. I remember that. But then after that, it was just like, oh, we don't know. That's, yep.
Yeah.
Just take some ibuprofen. So I would take like a ridiculous amount of ibuprofen before my soccer games in high school. And everyone was like, what are you doing? It's like, I don't know. This is the only way I can get through it. Which is just so weird to me now that I would do that because I never take ibuprofen. But
well, I mean, as someone who's experienced a significant amount of menstrual related pain, so mine was always with the period.
Yeah.
But horrifying. And the way you described it was that it was like way worse than anything you did experience during your period.
Yeah.
It felt like menstrual cramps, and you said sometimes you would actually start to bleed.
Yeah.
So to me, when I hear that, I mean, it feels like it's like a legitimate question to be like, could this be endo, right? Like it doesn't seem like it's totally out of the realm of the possibilities. And I suppose the only question that I would have for you now, so the way that you described it, obviously this was something that was ongoing for a long time, and then the taking the birth control pills helped you to manage it.
Yeah.
And I thought what you said was really interesting, that when you were on Accutane, essentially like a ridiculous dose of vitamin A, that it kind of subsided and then came back when you stopped. I feel like there's a lot of interesting pieces to your story that we just don't have the answers to. But so do you still run? Is that still a part of your life now?
Yeah, I do. I still run and I don't have any problems. And I think it's really all diet related. Because maybe like about a year ago, I got one time when I went on a run, I got some mild discomfort. Nothing nearly as bad, but I could feel it. But it didn't really stop me. It just made me feel uncomfortable. But that was only one time. And I think during that time, after it happened, I was like, that's happening again. I should stop eating dairy.
That was your thought.
That was my thought, yeah. Because by that time, I had really been looking at my diet for a while and just kind of taking things in, taking things out, putting things back in. And I decided to take out dairy, and I did for a while. But I don't know if it was just the dairy or if it was other things. But when I took it out pretty seriously for about a year. I didn't have any issues. But also I have been eating some dairy here and there the past couple months, probably like 3 months, and have been running and haven't had issues. So I'm not exactly sure what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very interesting. And then you mentioned that you had like some cramping during your periods, but never bad. So how are your periods now? No, so you're not so you've been off the copper IUD at the time of the recording. You said like about, was it 7 months? April, May, June,
yeah.
September. Yeah, about like 7-ish.
A little bit over a year now I've been off of it.
Okay. And so then how would you rate your periods now? So 0, like nothing, 10, horrifying.
Probably like a 1.
And then were they always kind of like that, or were they a little bit different when you were a teen?
They've always been pretty mild. Maybe like a 1 or a 2. I remember sometimes like period cramps would wake me up the first day, and they were like a little bit uncomfortable when I was younger, but maybe a little bit more uncomfortable, but it was never very uncomfortable, which I know is part of endometriosis. Is usually your periods are pretty uncomfortable.
Not necessarily. It's an interesting, really? Yeah, it's an interesting condition. So some women have no pain. Mm-hmm. So because endometriosis is associated with the endometrial tissue kind of growing outside of where it's supposed to. So depending on where it's growing, some women have it and have kind of significant amounts of it and no pain. So, and then the way that it so some women would discover it if they can't get pregnant, and they do like everything else looks totally fine. And then as a last resort, they kind of do the laparoscopic surgery to rule that out, and then they discover it. So not all women with endo have pain. therefore not all women would have it during their period. Yeah, I mean, we could certainly go down the rabbit hole, but I just wanted to, I suppose, just kind of unpack that a little bit with you and kind of go through some of that, just because I always find it to be really fascinating. You may have even heard some of the episodes that I've done in this series where I'm talking to somebody and they're telling me about their pain, and I'm kind of asking, like, so no one said like this could possibly be endo, like,
yeah,
like just like to say, like, I don't know if it is, right? Like, that's not the point. The point is to like investigate a person thoroughly, right?
Right. Yeah, there wasn't much investigation.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I think the good part about it is that somehow you were able to kind of tune into your intuition a little bit as you got older and just kind of feel it out. I think it's really interesting that you were able to, like, you don't really have like solid evidence, but you certainly have the lived experience of making some changes, becoming aware of certain dietary things, just kind of doing your thing essentially, and kind of paying attention, even feeling that bit of pain that one day and kind of pulling back and making some changes. Like that's body literacy essentially.
Yeah, I'm really, really thankful because running is like a big part of my life now, and I hated running before for obvious reasons. But yeah, I just wish that there was some easy way for women who have this similar problem, because when I was in the thick of it and trying to find some answers on the internet, it seemed that there were women who had this similar issues. It would be nice if there was like an easy way for them all to know that they can run without extreme pain.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe that it's a team approach. So I feel like we all need to have doctors because we need to have the ability to run tests and we need to have that level of care. But in addition to doctors, when it comes to menstrual cycle issues specifically, because of the way that medicine typically treats, if you want to call it that, period pain, essentially by suppressing the cycle with hormones, then if you're looking for actual answers of like what could be the root cause, what could be the reason, could it be a hormonal thing? You had a sense that it was a hormonal thing, but you have to kind of look elsewhere as well. So in addition to your regular doctor, you know, if you really want to get to the bottom of it, so if anyone's listening and had that experience and is still having that experience, then it's really important to consider going to a different type of practitioner who is willing to do the hormonal tests and to kind of look under the hood of the car, so to speak, to figure out what could be wrong. And even just a type of practitioner who would ask the question, like, could this be endo? Right. Just to ask it.
Yeah.
Just to have that level of concern. That's all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump into your session. So as we were talking about this before we started recording, we actually had a hot seat session together last night. So we really got into your chart and talked about a lot of different things. But, you know, I still think we can kind of go into depth in some of the things that we spoke about. But is there anything that you wanted to make sure that we talked about today? Anything that you wanted to make sure that we would get into?
I guess just similar topics as yesterday. When I look at my charts, the main concerns for me are the lack of mucus that I see throughout my cycle, and then the somewhat mildly low temps. And I know that yesterday, or during the hot seat, you asked because when I'd been charting before I started the course, I always checked internally. And since then, you have advised us to check externally. And you had asked me if when I checked internally, if I noticed that I didn't have much mucus. And I said no, because I was confused between the difference between vaginal cell slough and mucus. So it always looked like there was something. But I realize now that when I first read Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and she talked about checking externally, and then there was a little box about checking internally if you wanted to do that initially I checked externally. So this was 8 months ago now. Initially I checked externally and I didn't see anything. And so that's why I started checking internally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to give you that little tidbit of information. But yeah, mucus, the lack of mucus in my cycle, and then kind of low temps are the main things that I find interesting / concerning.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so common, and ultimately it's just, when it comes to fertility awareness, there's no like one fertility awareness method. There's lots of different ways to do it. Some methods are mucus only, some methods are temperature only, and some other methods, for instance, like the Marquette method, I don't even think you necessarily would have to check mucus because it's measuring your estrogen levels via a fertility monitor. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but all of the methods are trying to figure out when your fertile window is, when ovulation is, and use it accordingly. And so we talked a lot about kind of the internal checking and kind of how to organize that. I hear that a lot from women who say, like, if I don't check internally, then I won't find anything, which is fair, because in some cases that's true. So there's a couple of things to think about. I mean, the first thing is, if you're not seeing any, we kind of have to go through and think about why. And we spoke a little bit about that. So it's possible that your cervix might need a bit of support. I think we talked about just nutritional support and things like that. But because we at this stage have like a chart and a half, I feel like by the time we get to the end of our time together and we kind of get to the end of your current chart, we'll have a better sense of what's happening with your cervix and your mucus. And so just for the listeners who can't see your chart, so what we're seeing really is that before you approach ovulation, it's pretty much dry.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot going on. And then as you do approach ovulation, we do see a bit of mucus. And you mentioned that typically when you're writing it down, you're also checking your cervix. So it might be something that you're actually seeing when you're checking your cervix, which is completely fine, because if you're checking your cervix and you pull out some peaked mucus, we got to chart that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that happens a lot is what you have experienced, which is that when you check internally, it can feel like you have mucus every day because there's always something on your finger. Mm-hmm. But when you check in this way, you start to realize that your fertile window isn't like the whole time.
Right. Yeah.
Which is good, because then it can help you to, especially because in your case, you're currently avoiding pregnancy.
Correct.
And so it can be a bit more challenging if you are charting and it's like every single day.
Right.
You have mucus, right? Because you have to consider yourself fertile when you see mucus. So yesterday we talked a little bit about checking cervical position and how when you're not seeing a lot of mucus, the cervical position is helpful. And maybe just share with me, so we talked about the cervix and I kind of went through all of that. And how did you feel afterwards, like in terms of after you kind of digested all of our cervical position discussion yesterday?
Well, are you asking how I feel about this, like just my thoughts on the cervical position information in general?
Well, I suppose how you feel about it, because I know one of the challenges was that you weren't feeling as confident, especially because it had felt a little bit different this cycle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in general, I feel like since I was checking internally for so long, I feel like I understand what my cervix feels like when it's really low and firm, and what it feels like closer to ovulation, that it gets really high up and soft, and I feel a lot of mucus when I check internally. And this time, or this chart, it seems to be like bouncing around a little bit more. Like one day it'll seem higher up and it'll seem softer, and then the next day it seems firmer. And then also something that was really helpful that you taught me was about the tilt, like that when you're like right after your period, your cervix is tilted back, like more towards your anus. And then as you get closer to ovulation, it's straight in line with your vaginal opening. So that was something that I had noticed before, but didn't really understand why that was happening. So that's another thing that's been helpful just to like figure out. So now I have like firmness or softness and tilt, and then height of the cervix as well. Yeah, but this cycle, it's been a little bit odd. I don't know if something different is going on with my hormones that's making it kind of bounce back and forth between firm and medium, or if I'm just like micro analyzing it, which could be a possibility with me.
Well, the cervix is kind of, I mean, in the cervix is kind of, it's like elusive in the moment. So on a day-to-day basis, it's kind of not, it's not the same as temperature. Like when you take your temperature, it's a number and you put it on a graph. Like it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things with temperature fluctuations and different things that can affect it, but at the end of the day, like it's a number, so you can put it on a chart. With the cervix, it's a lot more subjective and in the moment, so it's a really common experience. So currently, you are in the pre-ovulatory phase of your cycle. You started producing some mucus. And unless something happened today with your temperature, I'm guessing that you're still approaching ovulation.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of the tough stage. Like this is kind of the stage of your cycle where your estrogen is starting to rise. So you're starting to see some changes in the cervix, but it's not quite like the day before ovulation with the highest level of estrogen, which then makes it the most obvious. So you're in an interesting spot. And so what I would encourage you to do is once you ovulate and then we go into the post-ovulatory phase, I bet if you look back, then it'll make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But when you're in the weeds, then it feels like, because what I always say is what I notice is that even though you're telling me that it's not making a lot of sense and it's kind of in this middle ground, kind of like what we spoke about yesterday, there's a point that I always see on the chart where it goes from looking one way to looking another way. So even though you're kind of confused about what it's doing today, there's still this kind of clear shift. And so that helps us, especially when you're not seeing as much mucus. It's really there's kind of like this paradox. So when you're trying to avoid pregnancy, there's a part of you, and you let me know if you've ever thought this, but I think a lot of women who use fertility awareness have thought this. Just a thought. Doesn't mean they're going to act on it. But it's like, do I really want to be like super fertile if I'm trying to avoid, right? Wouldn't it be better if my cycle was kind of messed up? Right? Because I'm not trying. But what's interesting is that when you're using fertility awareness, if you're like super fertile and your cycle is really healthy and you've got lots of, so not like lots meaning outside of the normal window, but you have like it falls in the range. So you have several days of peak mucus. It's obvious. You know, maybe you go from non-peak a couple days to peak and then you ovulate. When your cycles are really healthy, it's a lot easier to chart because the shift from your pre-ovulatory infertile days to your mucus days is really obvious when you're healthy. So when your cervix is healthy, your mucus is flowing, like your endocrine system is doing its thing, you got like great hormone flowing and all that. Even though, yes, you could get pregnant like that, right? It makes it so much easier to chart because your fertile window is very well defined. It's actually more challenging when your cycle is a little bit off in the sense that, for instance, in your case, we have to just rely more heavily on your cervical position. So, you know, I think we talked about this a little bit, but it's kind of like your homework because we're going to end our group in a couple weeks. So as you continue charting for the next couple of charts, it would be really a great opportunity for you to keep checking your cervix, especially in that pre-ovulatory phase, and really start to kind of pay attention because you're going to see that the cervix kind of changes when you start to see your mucus. And, we talked about it as like, don't judge what the cervix does, just pay attention to what it does. But you're going to start to see that pattern of just like, oh, when I head into my fertile window, my cervix kind of does this.
Right. Yeah.
And then combine that with your mucus observations, and all of a sudden you have a way to define when you're heading into your fertile window. It makes it a little bit easier to feel more comfortable and confident, like when you're ready to kind of broach that subject of pre-ovulatory dry days.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful. Like, it's nice. I like this method because you have the temperature and the cervix and the mucus. So it's really nice to be able to cross-check all of them and to not have just one observation that you're relying on. Because if that observation's out of whack, then it could be really confusing at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as an instructor, for me, I like having a lot of tools in my tool belt. I mean, you see me, I'm always pulling out pictures and all kinds of stuff because I really like having different situations, because it's one thing when you're just charting your own cycle, because then you just know that one presentation of what the menstrual cycle looks like. But in my seat, I see a lot of different presentations of cycles. So you know this from being in the group, but it's like, I don't necessarily think every woman needs to check her cervix. I think that it's helpful when you're learning the method. And of course, I encourage everybody to do it at least for one cycle so that you get that baseline. And if you ever want to use it, then you kind of know. But it's really helpful to have. And for women who don't have an abundance of mucus, it's really helpful kind of in the interim while we figure out why that is and try to improve it. It's really helpful just for the specific method aspect of it, whether you're trying or avoiding.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I also wanted to ask you about that we've talked about is lighting at night. So sleeping in a dark room. And I've been trying to find some good blinds to make my room completely dark. But this question came up when I was talking to my partner. When I was telling him about this, he brought up the fact that, you know, some stars are pretty bright too. Like, you know, like, and they're especially bright when the moon is at its lowest, you know, when it's at its darkest. That's when you can really see the stars. So has that come up at all in conversations that you've had, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I suppose what I would say is that, I don't know, like I live in a city and I used to live in a small town. And when I lived in that small town, yeah, the stars were really bright. But you know what? It actually got dark at night. Yeah. Even though the stars were bright. So this is like, again, not scientific. This is just me talking, but just my experience. So for instance, like I live in Toronto, pretty big city, and never gets dark here. And I don't even live in the heart of the city. I went out to Georgian Bay a couple summers ago with some friends of ours, and we stayed at this really nice, like quaint family resort. So it was like it was like not in the middle of nowhere, but it wasn't like it was like literally like you're on the lake. And it was, again, a smaller town. So outside of the city, like maybe 3 or 4 hours out of the city. And I remember one of our friends looked up at the sky and it was like he had never seen the stars. Yeah. Yeah. So it depends on where you live. I mean, light pollution is real. And when I'm when I'm putting my stuff over my windows at night, it's not to like blank out the stars. In my particular situation, it's quite literally to like blank out the street light that's like in front of my back window. Yeah. Yeah. It's a big difference. Yeah. So even when it's like, even when the stars are so full, it's still dark. Yeah. At night. That's very true. Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing outside of like, kind of like, I say this with love. It's like the peanut gallery, right? Like, well, what about this and what about that? Like outside of that kind of stuff, like what I've actually seen with my kind of own eyes, because I'm looking at women's charts, is that, you know, when you actually, it depends on what the issue is, because sometimes it's not as simple as just closing the blinds, but sometimes it is. So I've seen it where, you know, you're sleeping in the dark and the luteal phase lengthens a bit, and like you just generally see improvements in hormone balance. And then of course you like feel better and you sleep better. One of the things that pretty much every one of my clients has said to me who has figured out how to make their room black, pitch black, is that they are sleeping so much better, so much more soundly. Yeah. Yeah. My room at my parents' house where I grew up, I was able to get that completely dark, and not knowing that it was something that was like good for you, but just something that I did. And I slept. I've never had problems sleeping, but I would sleep so soundly. I would go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. And when I woke up, I felt great and ready for the day. And we moved to an area
well, I moved out of my parents, and now living here, there is a street light right outside of my window, my bedroom window. So I have like cardboard in the window right now, but it looks a little, we'll just say I'm trying to find some blinds that aren't really expensive, because I want to see how it'll affect. Because I think I'm not sleeping as well, or like I just feel more tired when I wake up in the morning. And I'm sure it's because of all the light that doesn't seem like that much. But yeah, when you put it into perspective that none of that light would be there because it's all artificial lighting, then it makes sense that it could make a big difference.
Well, and it's not all anecdotal. So there's a lot of research on the impact of light on your hormones. Yeah. And so like during the day, like when you wake up in the morning, if you've ever had this experience where let's say your room is really dark, or you're like staying with someone who lives in the middle of nowhere or something, I don't know, camping. But either way, like when you are like in the dark and then you wake up, or like, I live in Canada, so it's like in the winter, it gets really dark early and it stays dark. So you wake up and it's dark, and you go to bed and it's dark. And so anyways, so in the wintertime, like you wake up and it's dark and you feel more tired until you like turn on the lights. And then in the summer, if you're feeling tired, but you wake up and go outside, and then the light kind of hits you, that wakes you up like coffee. And so light naturally stimulates your cortisol production, and that's like nature's coffee. Like that's actually what is supposed to make you feel energized in the morning. Yeah. And then if you ever had that experience too of like you actually feel like tired, like there's something like over your eyes, like making it hard for you to open them, and then the light kind of wakes you up, like that was the melatonin that is like that you produce at night when it's dark, that like makes you feel tired.
Right.
So in addition to, just the casual chat that we're having, this is like a scientific thing. And so we all kind of know that if you were to drink coffee, it affects your hormone levels. Like, so drinking coffee at night is going to make it harder for you to fall asleep. Typically, like the research shows that it does take longer for you to fall asleep if you drink coffee closer to bed, actually at any point of the day, but obviously the effect is more pronounced closer to bed. Yeah. But light exposure has a similar effect on that. So there was one study that I looked at where if they exposed the participants to bright light at like 9 p.m., it had an effect that was equivalent to coffee in terms of the kind of how long it took them to fall asleep, because it would take longer to fall asleep, and they had a delayed onset of melatonin. So your circadian rhythm would say that your sleep hormones are supposed to start at a certain time, but if you are exposed to if you're exposed to it like late at night, your melatonin starts to rise later on. Yeah. But then also, I'll just quickly like stop blabbing on. But when if you were exposed to light like throughout the evening, like throughout your sleep when it's supposed to be dark, then the kind of like the total melatonin that you produce all night is lower. So it would make sense what you're saying to me, that you do feel a bit more tired, especially if you have a street light outside the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all the real things.
That brings up a couple questions for me. First, do you change your housing lighting at all at night? Like when it's dark outside, do you, like before you go to bed, or I don't know, maybe from like 5 to 10 o'clock, or do you change your lighting at all? Do you have just candles, or what do you do? And then my other question is the effect of chocolate. So I don't drink coffee, but I do know that chocolate has a similar constituent to caffeine, being theobromine, which can affect the body similarly, but not completely the same as caffeine. And if you know anything about how that affects our hormones. Yeah.
Well, the first part of that, I haven't taken it to like that level in my house. I don't have like salt lamps everywhere, and I don't yet have cool, orange sunglasses, but they're on my list. Yeah. What I do at night, I know I'm sensitive to light. So, right now we're recording at 9:30 at night. So what I like right now, if you were in my house and you were looking at my computer screen is orange. So for my devices, I use all the hacks.
Yeah.
My phone screen, I turn it red at night. It's so cool. I figured out how to do it too. Like there's like a shortcut. So I like just have to I have an iPhone. I just have to click the button 3 times and it turns it red.
Oh, you'll have to tell me how to do that.
Yeah, I'll have to remember. We'll talk about it in the group when we get to our sleep section. But so there's certain like that. Those are things that I do. And I know that makes a difference. Like, cause like in an ideal world, of course I wouldn't be on my technology, at all at night, but I am sometimes. And like I am right now, but I found that it does make a difference to make it yellow. And because I do feel tired. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do. It doesn't necessarily have to go too far. And one thing I actually wanted to mention to you about, because I've had this conversation with a number of clients, which is like, I've got to go find the perfect blinds and blah, blah. Like you can also get thumbtacks and a dark sheet. Yeah. So, like as an interim measure, like I know it doesn't look cute, but like there's ways to get a dark blanket for a while, and like what I mean, like there's ways to just try it out without having to wait until you find the perfect blackout blind and that kind of stuff. So just as a side, an aside, your question about the coffee or not the coffee but the chocolate, I mean it really depends on how much you eat. Like maybe one of the things that we could do is like actually look it up and find out how much caffeine is in coffee, and then or how much, I keep saying coffee, but I mean chocolate. But I think that might be something we could do maybe in our Facebook group to kind of like actually see like, well, how much caffeine is in chocolate compared to coffee? Like where does it?
Yeah.
Just so that we have that sense, because off the top of my head, I don't have that information, but I'm sure we could do a bit of searching and find that. And I think that would be an interesting discussion for everybody to kind of look into that a little bit. I mean, I know that caffeine definitely does have an impact, and it just depends on how much you're eating. I feel like I really want to know like the amounts, because off the top, like I said, I don't know how much comparatively caffeine is in chocolate, but I would imagine that if you're eating like a moderate amount, like a couple squares, like I don't know, how much chocolate do you have to eat for it to be the equivalent of coffee? So that's going to be the question we are going to have to find out, because I don't know.
Yesterday, I can tell you that we were having our session at 8:30 at night, and so we went till a little bit after 10 o'clock. So I was on my computer and I ate a whole chocolate bar, and I had the hardest time falling asleep, and I should have known not to combine, because usually if I am on my computer before bed, I can generally go to sleep pretty fine. But if I have chocolate right before bed, and are
we talking about like 95%, like, or are we talking about like loaded with sugar chocolate?
85%.
That's not bad. Yeah. I mean, in that situation, my first thought would be that unless your screen is orange, then like, yeah. I think a lot of us underestimate how much the light affects it. Yeah. Now, I'm sure that having the chocolate right before bed, and there is sugar in it as well, albeit less, but there is. And then there's, like it's hard to know how big the what. Like seriously, now I'm gonna have to like do this research and report back. But in terms of like, just to put it out there, we underestimate how much it is. So, what kind of a computer do you have?
I have an Asus. I do have like some type of, it's called something flux. Like, and it changes the lighting on my computer when it's nighttime. So it is a little bit different, but I don't know.
You could probably adjust the settings to make it more orange.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that's what I have. I have the f.lux or something like that. And yeah, you can adjust it to be very, very warm. That's a good start anyways. Because we definitely underestimate how much, because we're always on our devices. So, and if we're always on our devices, then we don't really know what it's like to not be on the devices. So, and it's easier to start somewhere, and it's easier to start with turning. So the screen should be orange. I wish I could show you what my screen looks like.
Okay.
And I will show you what my cell phone looks like in our group, because my cell phone is red. Like my husband thinks I'm crazy. He's just like, what? And I did it because I did it to his phone too.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can't see anything. And I'm like, I don't care.
Suck it up and good for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we kind of bring our session to an end, did you have any last thoughts, comments, and questions today?
I think we covered most of my bases. I guess maybe the last thing so if at the end of our time together, we do decide that my temps are on the lower end, would the things that I do to help my cervix also help my temperature? Or would I have to add other things in to increase my temperature to a more normal range?
Well, the temperature thing is a completely separate conversation. Okay. And it really starts with doing some investigation. And so when you have concerns about your temperature, it is warranted to make an appointment to your doctor, have your thyroid tested, just to rule it out, like kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, which is like, we got to ask the questions, and we don't go into this knowing exactly why, but starting there and finding out, okay, is everything good there? And then if it is, then you can kind of look to see if it's related to nutrient deficiency. So you could have your doctor like run some blood work and just, check to see where you're, just depending on your practitioner, but check to see where your iron levels are at, zinc. I think we spoke about iodine, those types of things that are associated with, like, deficiencies are associated with lower temperature. But it gets complicated, because from what I've seen, when I'm working with someone and their temperatures are low and they're consistently low, it requires support, because you don't know what it is. And so you do have to have a professional kind of look at you, do some testing so that you can figure out what is going on with you specifically. There's no general stuff I can say, go do this and your temperature will rise, because it really depends on what it is.
Yeah.
And so it's a completely separate thing, because it's related to your metabolism, often to thyroid function. And so that's something that we, got to look into a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here and for sharing your experience. And just to give a sense, I know like a lot of women are, considering fertility awareness. It's a big jump. For you, you weren't on the hormones like right before you transitioned, but I'm sure it was still a big jump for you to kind of go from having this birth control that was kind of like all the time reliable, except for your 3 friends who got pregnant.
Yeah.
Except for that. But I mean, for you, it had been working, right?
Yeah, I didn't get pregnant.
But how did you mitigate the kind of like the fear? I mean, we all feel the fear of change in general, but also when you're moving from like a kind of more long-term type of birth control to fertility awareness, which is you're having a cycle and you're ovulating, and obviously conception is possible if you have sex in your fertile window. How did you kind of mitigate that fear?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe 2 things. First was I didn't really want to be on the hormones or an IUD for the longest time. And it took me a couple years to decide to get off of both of them. I was afraid when I got off hormonal birth control that I would gain weight, because I had lost weight on hormonal birth control. So I was kind of like, hey, this isn't so bad. And I also didn't have any acne. And so I was afraid when I got off of that those things would come back. And luckily they didn't. And then transitioning off of the copper IUD to FAM, I was just worried about if I'd be able to be successful using fertility awareness. And I think I did a lot of reading, and when I read Taking Charge of Your Fertility and really understood the menstrual cycle for the first time ever in my life, it just made sense that we would have a fertile window and a lot of time that we weren't fertile. And it just seemed very scientific, and I kind of have a sciencey brain. So I was comforted by all the studies and the information. And I also started charting while I still had my IUD in. So I charted maybe like 3 or 4 cycles just to feel like, just to get the hang of checking and seeing if I could be consistent enough with it that I would feel confident that I could use it as birth control. And then I just took the plunge, and I'm so glad that I did, because I love all the information that I get about my health. And I find it really comforting to know that I can figure things out now when I'm not trying to get pregnant, and optimize my health for years. And then if I ever decide that I want to get pregnant, like hopefully things will all be lined up and I'll just be ready to go and get pregnant right away. That would be ideal. Yeah. So I'm excited to just be the healthiest person I can be, and to use my chart to guide me in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that I firmly believe that allowing yourself to just have a menstrual cycle is a really fantastic way of preserving your fertility, because there's no transition period. Like you said, when you're ready to conceive, your body doesn't have to go through any type of shift or change or normalization process or anything. You just start to try. And I really also appreciate what you said about how you prepared yourself. So you actually took some time. You obviously were doing some research and looking into fertility awareness, but you were charting for several months still with the copper IUD in, so that you could kind of ease into it. And I think that I just want to highlight that. It's really important, because you can try it, but I would never suggest for you to like discover fertility awareness on Monday and then like start charting your cycle on Tuesday and try to use it for birth control, because that's not how this works. Yeah. This is a skill that we develop over time, and we kind of naturally ease into it. And, if you're doing it on your own, then 3 months is the minimum that you should be charting before you even consider having unprotected sex. It seems, I think, to some women as overkill, but it is not, because there are so many different factors. And especially, you just have to, you want to give yourself the time to learn it and the time to feel comfortable, and you want to take it in stages. And then, of course, if you want to speed up your learning curve, then it's really helpful to take a class. I think it's really, obviously I'm biased. I'm a teacher. And I also, I didn't, like, I could pretend like I was self-taught, but I just happened to live in a place where I had the ability to go to teachers and learn like monthly for years until I started teaching myself. So I could say I was self-taught, but I wasn't, because I was always surrounded by women who were trained to chart. And so given my experience is a bit unique in that way, because I know that it's possible to do it on your own, but no one even who does it on their own does it on their own. You're still part of groups, like you're still in conversations with women who are charting. Yeah. So anyways, this is a really long kind of response to your experience, but I just appreciate you sharing that and how you kind of eased into it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And I've found working with you particularly helpful in like the health aspect, like optimizing health. Because I have learned things about how to prevent pregnancy as well, but I felt pretty confident coming into the class about how to keep from getting pregnant. But all the nuances and like the little details that you have about like where your temperature range should normally be and what your cycle should normally look like has been really helpful for me. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. You can tell this is like my jam. I love talking about cycle. And I'm passionate about it because it really shifted my life in a positive direction. And so I'm really happy to hear you say that, Leah. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I know this episode, what my feedback, I always say this, but the feedback that I get from my clients is always that they really love these episodes because these are real women's stories. And of course, I love sharing those on the podcast. So thanks so much for being part of it.
Yeah, I hope it can help some other women. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/236. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Leah, the other Leah. in the group this time, there was actually 2 Leahs, and they both decided to do on-air sessions. So I think that's kind of neat. But yeah, today's session with Leah was really great. It was really powerful for me to hear about Leah's experience. And I know that whenever I hear about women experiencing pain and having that not really taken that seriously, and just basically having the medical professions kind of shrug their shoulders, put their hands in the air and say, I don't know, it's always a bit frustrating to me. And so one of my hopes for you as a listener to this episode, if you've ever experienced something like that, if you are still experiencing that, whether it's extreme pain with your periods or pain outside of your periods, pain with sex, whatever the case may be, if you've had a similar experience and your pain has been dismissed or just not necessarily taken seriously, or you've been told, there's nothing that can be done and that's it, I would just encourage you to continue searching for answers. If your healthcare professional isn't really able to look into it deeply, it may just be because they don't specialize in that area and they just are not that knowledgeable about it. And there are other health professionals that do specialize in that area, know what tests that you might need, and would be willing to do them. And I suppose that's just the message that I'd like to leave you with today, which is that I've been told so many times in my own life that there was nothing I could do. I had doctors tell me that there was nothing I could do to change my period. So my menstrual cycles used to be like 45 days long on average when I was a teenager. And I remember I went to specialists. I made my doctor give me a referral to a specialist in my early 20s. And I really wanted the answer. I was like, okay, so what can I do to make my periods come closer together? Like, what can I do to make my cycles more close to the normal range? And I was categorically told that there was nothing I could do. And I've had so many experiences like that I can't even count. And they've definitely shaped my view of the medical system and just about the importance of my role in my own care. And, years later, my menstrual cycles are, they average around 30, 31 days now. So, that I was told that apparently I'm a miracle or something, but I just share that. I share that personal story with my cycles and all of that, just to let you know that when you're told that there's nothing you can do and we don't know what it is, it's really a sign that you're probably not in the right office, because there are other women who have experienced similar symptoms and similar situations who have found ways to improve or reverse their situation, their condition. So I think that, again, just one of the things that I really believe in is just that concept of having a team to support you and recognizing that every single practitioner that you see isn't a specialist in your specific issue. And so, especially when it comes to issues relating to the menstrual cycle, women's health, hormone balance, it's really important to not just stop at your doctor. Even if your doctor is amazing, it's still helpful to establish a team of healthcare professionals. You want somebody in a functional medicine, coming from a functional medicine perspective, who's willing to do hormone testing and look to see if they're able to find the root cause. The whole concept of functional medicine is that the body is supposed to work normally, and when it's not, it means that there's actually a deeper issue. And so having someone that is willing to look at the deeper cause and try to help you to find answers as to what the problem could be, having someone like that on your team is essential. And considering other modalities, especially when it comes to period pain, so modalities like, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, there's a lot of research to show how effective acupuncture is for pain. And so it's just helpful to remember that there's other modalities, other health practitioners, and really thinking of that idea of a healthcare team to support you. No one practitioner has all the answers. And it makes complete sense, because even just for our body and our general health, your doctor is not your dentist, and your dentist is not your massage therapist. And, there's just so many different roles. And so it would make sense then that if you're having a specific issue with your menstrual cycle or your endocrine system or your hormone balance, that you may have to go to someone who specializes in that area. And that may not be your regular doctor. So I hope that you enjoy a wonderful holiday season. I hope that you've been able to take some time off to relax, have a break, eat lots of food. Whatever you're doing to celebrate the season, I hope that you've been able to, have an opportunity to do that a bit more. And just a reminder that there are still spaces available in my 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for more details and also to apply. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. And so with that said, bye-bye 2018. This is the final episode of the year. So wishing you the very best in 2019. I'm really excited to see what the new year brings. And with that said, I just want to thank you for listening to the show, for supporting the show, for sharing the show with your friends, for all of your amazing reviews. There's actually quite a bit of reviews on iTunes, and in several different countries as well. And so I just want to thank all of you for being part of the Fertility Friday community. And so until next time, be well and happy charting.